Good evening. Friends of the River Cam are pleased to welcome so many of you this evening to hear Paul Powlesland talk about nature rights. Friends of the Cam is an alliance of environmental and community groups. This includes the Federation of Cambridge Residents Associations, the Campaign to Protect Rural England, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Cambridge Schools Eco Council, and the Cambridge Labour Party Environment Forum. Our website is at friendsofthecam.org, where you'll find our charter, which expresses our commitment to preventing over-abstraction and pollution of our river and its feeder chalk streams. We're presently unfunded, but will take no funds from any organisation that supports massive, unsustainable housing, office and infrastructure growth in our area. We're delighted that Paul could join us. He's a barrister, environmental activist and wild swimmer who campaigns for the legal recognition of the rights of nature. He founded Lawyers for Nature under the banner representing the natural world and all who are seeking to defend it. Lawyers for Nature gives legal advice, proposes legislation, and represents environmental activists. He managed to stop the illegal arrests of activists in Sheffield protecting trees, and those previously arrested received compensation. He has a particular love for rivers. He set up Friends of the River Roding in Barking to revive a stretch of the riverbank and restore access for the local community. He believes that mass action is necessary to defend the natural world. He has said, "We stand at the most crucial juncture in the history of humanity. It's a really weird time, yet we are at the make or break of our civilizations. No part will remain untouched if they collapse. Yet everyone is blithely carrying on as if this issue is not real." Paul will speak for about half an hour, but we'll keep in contact, Paul.
Yeah, I was hoping about 20 minutes, half an hour, because I would also really like the chance for people to put questions and to discuss, because often things are said, or things are brought up that I don't think about during my talk. So yeah, thank you all, and thank you all for coming. I have to say, I am a little bit nervous. I'm used to going into the High Court and getting shouted at by angry judges who believe nature is purely property and don't like it when a barrister tells them they think it's sacred. But I'm actually more nervous being in front of all of you because I see some incredible activists here, people I know who've done so much to protect the natural world. So it's a real honor to speak in front of you. So in arguing for nature rights today, I'm going to be asking you to step outside of the current way we conceptualize law. Because sometimes when you're inside a system, it's very easy to imagine that that's always the way it has been. It's the only way it could be. And that these laws that we operate under are somehow sort of handed down from on high. But actually, being a lawyer myself, I come to understand that the law is far more mercurial than that. And in its essence, the law is just the system that we choose to govern ourselves by. It's the way that we choose to operate in this world. And we can, at any point, change it. And of course, the key question is how that change happens. And I'm going to be coming on to that in this talk. But just to help you step outside of that idea that could be seen as crazy to give rights to trees and rivers. And I am waiting for my first Daily Mail headline of the crazy barrister who wants to give human rights to trees. But just to help you step outside of that, I'm currently, I think, about 200 meters from one of the most famous rivers in the world, the Thames. A river which is the entire reason for this city being here, that has flowed on its course for thousands of years before humans probably even came to be, and that has outlived all our civilizations and will outlive this one, I'm sure. And yet that river is seen in our legal system as a dead thing, merely as an item of property that is to be used according to human whims and isn't given any rights or standing itself. Now, let's contrast that with companies. During the course of my talk now, in the next 20 minutes, you can go online and for the price of £12, you can create an entirely fictitious entity which has full legal personhood and is accorded rights under the law. That's obviously a company. And because companies are so ubiquitous in our world, indeed so powerful, we often forget that actually they are entirely fictional. They don't exist. They're just a device that are made up by lawyers. And they haven't even existed that long. For the vast amount of human history, there were no such things as companies. But in the 19th century, it was thought useful to invent them, and so we did. And now everyone just acts as though it's totally normal that there's this fictional entity that is accorded full rights and responsibilities in our. And I give that example just to help you to, as I say, step outside of the ideas of what is normal to give legal rights and personhood to in our current system. And to maybe let your mind be slightly more imaginative this evening in imagining that we could give rights to nature, particularly rivers. And I would also say it's very interesting and telling that lawyers in their wisdom managed to invent a form of legal personhood for an entirely fictional entity hundreds of years before they managed to actually give it to things that really exist, trees and rivers. And not only things that exist, but things which we rely on for our own existence. And to put hundreds of thousands of people, if you imagine all the lawyers in the few miles away from me in London right now, acting in service of those companies, some of our best and brightest people working all hours in the service of those companies, before we put hardly any lawyers to work in the service of the natural world. It's very, very interesting for me. So before I dive in to why we should have rights of nature and how we go about getting rights of nature, it's probably best to slightly define our terms and say what rights of nature means. Now, rights of nature is a broad banner that has been interpreted differently all around the world and actually encompasses a number of separate subjects. So the first part is what's called legal personhood. So that is the idea that you are recognized as a legal person before the law and you can effectively sue and be sued. Now, when we say personhood, we often think that that's the same as a human being because we are all legal persons. Paul Powlesland can sue and I can be sued as well. But we also accord, as I've noted already, legal personhood to non-human actors, whether that's companies or charities, and we accord it to those humans who can't necessarily bring legal actions themselves, so children or people with less mental capacity. So that the idea of legal personhood is effectively someone who's recognized in law as being the holder of legal rights. You can own property, you can bring legal actions, you can be the holder of rights. That's the first element. The second element is the actual nature of the rights themselves. So you can be recognized as a legal person, but that's more of a procedural idea. The actual content of the rights matter. For instance, if you were a legal person, but you had other people had the right to kill you, that it wouldn't necessarily make being a legal person all that great. So it's the actual content of the rights that are also important. But of course, those things are not necessarily, not at all connected. We had legal personhood for adult humans, particularly men, over 100 years ago, but we're still working out exactly what rights we have. Do we have the right, what does the right to freedom of speech look like? Do we have the right not to be killed through pollution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the actual contents of the rights are the next thing along. And so for rivers, we could say, okay, well, we recognize this river as being a legal person, but do we recognize its right to be abstracted at all? Or to what extent do we allow it to be abstracted? And those are the actual content of the rights. And then the third issue, so legal personhood, legal rights, is who is to enforce those rights? Now, different models of nature rights have taken a different approach to this. So some nature rights models just merely put the rights out there and say, okay, we believe that trees have these rights in the hope that activists and people who wish to be enforcing those rights come forward and do so. But other models, particularly in New Zealand with the river I'm going to talk about in a moment, have put forward actual guardians. And still further, some models say actually we should put a duty on the state to actually uphold and enforce the rights of trees and rivers. So there's three basic elements to it: legal personhood, legal rights, and what I can term guardianship. And those are all things I'll be coming back to in the talk. So the history of nature rights is both a very long one and a very short one. Indigenous societies have, for thousands of years, recognized the idea that nature is alive, that nature is not a dead thing, and it clearly had rights within their society. But the Western tradition has only very recently begun to recognize this, and is still figuring out what it might all mean. So the first, the sort of seminal beginning of these ideas in the Western tradition was an article in 1979 by Christopher Stone called "Should Trees Have Standing?" Standing is an American word for can they bring legal cases effectively. So should they have personhood, to go back to our examples from earlier. And since then, it has to be said, or for a number of decades after that, rights of nature was seen very much as an academic exercise. So people writing in journals saying, yes, this is a great idea, of course we should give trees legal standing, but there not being necessarily many practical examples of enacting it. That feels like it's shifting around the world, if not quite yet in the UK. But in the last decade, there's been a real blossoming, a resurgence of interest in rights of nature all around the world. And it may not surprise you to learn that that has started out in countries with a strong indigenous presence. So in countries which have been the last to lose people with a connection to the land, who understand what I said earlier, that i.e. nature is alive and we are connected to it and it clearly has rights. So in the constitutions of a number of South American countries, Bolivia, Ecuador, the rights of Pachamama, Mother Earth, were recognized in the constitution. Query how much actual practical effect that had. In Bangladesh, a river was recognized as having rights. And in some Canadian Indigenous areas, there's been river-based jurisprudence as well. The one I particularly want to use as an example today is a river in New Zealand. And the reason I want to use it is partially because it's a very good example of all the different elements of personhood and legal rights that I outlined to you a moment ago. But that also because New Zealand is culturally and legally very similar to the UK. Although it has now a separate legal system because of the colonial connections between the UK and New Zealand, it has still one of the closest jurisprudence to the UK. So a common law system, it uses a lot of the English legal concepts. And yet they have managed to enact the rights of a river in a very radical way. So for anyone who says this is not possible, it couldn't be done, we can just point them to this river in New Zealand and say, look, very similar system, there you are, it's happening, it's there. But of course, the key difference, again, between the UK and New Zealand is the fact that in New Zealand, there was the presence of the Maori people. And the story of how the river came to have rights is a long and tortuous one, but effectively, following the peace treaty between the Crown and the Maori people in 1840, there's been, ever since that time, great rancor between them over what the terms of that peace were. And in order to settle that, the New Zealand government has in the past few decades sought to try and to bring about different acts of settlement with the Maori people. And as part of that, they demanded that their sacred river, the Wanganui River, was recognized, was given rights and recognized as a legal person. And so it was done. It was created as a legal entity in the, and I'm sorry if anyone is Maori or knows how to pronounce Maori here, but my pronunciation is not great, but I'll try my best. The Te Awa Tapua Act 2017, that's spelled T-E and then A-W-A and then T-U-P-U-A Act 2017. And I'll just read to you a little bit of what that act provided. Te Awa Tapua is an indivisible and living whole, comprising the Wanganui River from the mountains to the sea, incorporating all its physical and metaphysical elements. The Iwa and Hapu of the Wanganui River have an inalienable connection with and responsibility to Te Awa Tapua and its health and well-being. And the Act also stated Te Awa Tapua is a legal person and has all the rights, powers, duties, and liabilities of a legal person. And then went on to say that the river actually owns itself. So this Act created all of those different elements that I spoke to you at the start of this talk. It gave legal personhood to the river. It gave the river ownership of itself. It gave it rights, and these are set out at some length in the Act. And more importantly as well, it embraced the Maori principle of guardianship, and it's pronounced Kaitia Kitanga in Maori, which means it's the notion of guardianship. So there were representatives of the Crown and the Maoris appointed guardians of the river. And that was obviously in 2017, about 4 years ago. So we know it can be done, and we know it can be done in a jurisdiction that has very similar political and legal circumstances to the UK. So the question I want to look at now is, why should we do it? Why should we give rights to nature? Why should we give rights to rivers? In answering that, I would say that we should see this less as a completely unique giant leap into a whole new way of giving rights to things, but instead see it as one more step on a gradual journey that's been taking place for thousands of years. If we go back to, say, the Roman Empire, the only things that had legal rights, legal personhood, or full legal rights and personhood were white, adult, wealthy, freeborn citizen men. And since that time, we can obviously see this journey of gradually extending who should be given rights under the law. So we abolished slavery. We said that women also deserve to be legal persons, have legal rights under the law, and children, and poor people, and black people, and people who aren't citizens. And that journey has been going on for hundreds and indeed thousands of years. And this is just the next step in that journey. And to me, it seems like a very obvious and logical next step. But looking at some of those other struggles for to extend who should have legal rights and personhood, we can see there's something of a split between what I can term a spiritual dimension behind the extension of rights and a more practical one. So to give you an example of the spiritual idea, I would say that the abolition of the slave trade was a really good example of that. So in that, although there were some arguments that were logical, economic, if I can put it that way, most of the arguments behind the abolitionists were religious, were spiritual. The idea that we were all created equal under God. You know, am I not a man and a brother? And many of the abolitionists were Quakers and believers in a radical Christianity. And that spiritual element, I think, is a big, for me, a big part of why I believe nature should be given rights. And I'll be talking perhaps a bit more in the talk later on about that spiritual element and how it can be used to try and bring about these rights. At the other end of the scale, we can see practical arguments, and that's best typified by companies. There's very little spiritual argument behind the creation of companies. No one said they believed God demanded or under the interpretation of Christianity, we should have limited liability companies. It was purely a practical desire that was behind the creation of companies and giving them legal rights and responsibility. Now, what was that practical reasoning? Well, largely, it was to ensure that industrial capital could be deployed throughout the world as quickly and as efficiently as possible in the service of capitalism and development. And obviously, that's a political discussion we probably don't want to have today as to whether that was a good idea or not. But even as a lefty and an environmentalist, I have to admit that the development that has come hand in hand with that extension of rights to companies hasn't all been a bad thing. But of course, that practical argument also now works for the rights of nature. Because leaving aside the spiritual issue, leaving aside the idea that nature is alive, we are connected to it, that we have one earth and we should look after it, all those spiritual arguments, let's just look at the purely logical reasoning for a moment. Is the problem in the world today that industrial capital is not being deployed efficiently and fast enough? No, clearly not. The problem today is one of sustainability, and that if we don't radically restructure how our society does things in the next, well, in a very short order in the next few years, it is likely to collapse and cause a huge chain reaction of collapse across the natural world. Now, therefore, why are we trying to solve a very different problem that we have now with the solution that we adopted in the 19th century of creating limited liability companies and that type of legal personhood? And moreover, the rights of nature is really important to solving the sustainability crisis. And we can see that in this talk of green industrial revolution, in the over-concentration of carbon and the climate crisis and completely ignoring the ecological element. And if we plow forward in our society, as we are doing now, by saying, yeah, let's reduce carbon at all costs, let's have a green industrial revolution, we will rapidly accelerate our destruction of the natural world. And many of you are activists here, you don't need me to tell you the dangers that we will have from trying to decarbonize and turn green our current industrial society using green methods, just plastering all of the countryside with solar panels and wind farms, stripping and mining everything all over the place of batteries and for all the materials we'll need to create all those. So I would argue that in a kind of logical, practical sense, we need the rights of nature going forward now to ensure that we solve the great crisis that we face in a way that doesn't create a greater one in an ecological sense. And that's why I think rights of nature are so important at this juncture. We can also note the fact that environmental law, this idea of humans sort of handing down, this is how we're going to regulate the natural world, that has failed. We all know that. As the acronyms have multiplied, so has the destruction. We now have more SSSIs and we have WFDs and every form of acronym you can imagine. And yet the plunder and destruction of the natural world continues apace. And I believe that only by recognizing nature as a person and with rights can we try and stop that destruction. So, in the last 10, 15 minutes, I turn to the crucial question, the one I'm sure many of you are here for me to hear the answer to, and unfortunately I don't have a definitive answer to it. How do we bring about the rights of nature in the UK? Now, I've stated earlier that the places around the world which have generally instituted rights of nature have been those with a strong indigenous connection, which means that the UK may well be one of the hardest nuts to crack. We were one of the first countries to lose our indigenous connection to the land. And not only that, the ideology of nature being dead as being something to be economically exploited not only really began here, but we've exported that all around the world. And we also have a political context that is very difficult in terms of trying to bring about rights of nature. The New Zealand's granting of personhood happened through an act of their parliament. And in all honesty, I struggle to see the UK Parliament passing an act to give rights to rivers and personhood to rivers in any time soon. So do we just hold up our hands and say, oh, well, I guess we'll keep trying, or we'll give up, or will keep sort of writing about it in academic journals. I say we don't, and that there is a practical way forward for bringing about, as best we can in the current political and legal context, the rights of nature in the UK. And to do that, we need to look, again, we need to step outside of this idea of what the law is, because a lot of the time, because our current political context has been so stable for so long, we've lost something of the idea of revolution. And before anyone says anything, I should say that I believe in this sense in a peaceful revolution and not a revolution of ideas. But those revolutions don't necessarily happen just by political campaigning. They also happen by people fundamentally believing that the world should be run differently than it is, and acting peacefully in accordance with that. And I believe that throughout history, we can see so many examples of that genuinely shifting and changing things. And so the proposal is that people in this country can draft and declare the rights of rivers and other forms of nature, and then act peacefully in accordance with that declaration. In terms of drafting a declaration, there are already some quite interesting ones out there. There's on rightsofrivers.org, there's the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Rivers, which is quite long, but very interesting. I won't read it all to you, but there's a very interesting preamble. So finally, I'll read some out to you. Convinced that recognizing the rights of nature, and in particular, recognizing those river rights contained in this declaration, will foster the creation of a new legal and social paradigm based on living in harmony with nature and respecting both the rights of nature and human rights, particularly with reference to the urgent needs of indigenous communities and the ecosystem they have long protected. We declare that all rivers are entitled to the fundamental rights set forth in this declaration, which arise from their very existence on our shared planet. Further declare that all rivers are living entities that possess legal standing in a court of law. Establish that all rivers shall possess at a minimum the following fundamental rights: the right to flow, the right to perform essential functions within its ecosystem, the right to be free from pollution, the right to feed and be fed by sustainable aquifers, the right to native biodiversity, and the right to regeneration and restoration. And it goes on. I do actually urge you to read that declaration if you're able to find it online. So, of course, in strict legal terms, if you go to a river and read that, it has absolutely no effect whatsoever. But in the same terms, a bunch of people in 1789 meeting in a room in London and saying they believe that black people should not be enslaved and they have a right, they are equal to everyone else, and they are all our brothers, had no legal effect whatsoever. But it had a very powerful effect that had eventually a seismic change in the system just, I think, 27 years later. Hopefully we'll be on a quicker time frame. And that's, I believe, through, again, a combination of a spiritual element and a practical one. And I think there is a power in people standing up for rivers and saying they will peacefully do what's necessary to defend them and to uphold their rights and to articulate those rights. And to try and further that, I and Lawyers for Nature are seeking to encourage these drafting of these declarations and the setting up of local Friends of groups. And we can see why the Friends group, like Friends of the River Cam, my one, Friends of the River Roding, and other groups that are being set up all around the country. I think recently there's been Friends of the Upper Wye, Friends of the Medway, and there's been, I think, long-running Friends of the Chess. These groups are important, and this goes back to right at the start when I mentioned about the three different things. Of course, guardianship is so important. And these Friends of groups are able to act as a form of guardianship to uphold the rights of the river. And these declarations act as a spiritual, philosophical framework in which to put the amazing activism that so many people are already doing, and to encourage other people to step up into that activism. And we know already that law by itself does not necessarily have any effect. If anyone here is a river campaigner, you'll know that there are many laws which are currently roundly ignored because the enforcement actions of the EA are just completely insipid and at times non-existent. And so as a genuine thing, if I was to be offered the choice of a Rights of Rivers Act 2025, giving legal rights and personhood to all rivers in the UK, but with no enforcement action to actually uphold that and no one willing to actually do it, to step up and enforce it, or to have the current legal and political framework, but with Rights of Rivers groups on every single river in the UK committed to peacefully upholding the rights of that river, I would choose the latter. And the best part about the latter one is, of course, is that we're not waiting for somebody else to do something. It is a power that is within all of our hands and that exists right now. And as part of this, and in order to make sure these declarations are not just sort of put out into space and left there, we at Lawyers for Nature are trying to put together a toolkit to help local river guardians and friends of groups to uphold these rights. And so for every single right, there's three different ways that right can potentially be upheld. The first is sort of direct practical action. The second is legal challenges under the current law. And the third is campaigning and peaceful direct action. So to give an example, if we have a right in our declaration that rivers should be free from rubbish, as part of that, we can say, okay, here's how you can organize community litter pick days, and these are how it's done, and this is what other people are doing. Secondly, here's how you can get an order, a litter abatement order under the Environmental Protection Act 1990 to stop future litter going in that area. And thirdly, here's the address of all of the main packaging manufacturers and companies in the country who are putting this packaging out there without any plan for how it's going to get back, that you can either write to or go and protest outside of, or contact their shareholders to stop the littering happening. 1, 2, 3. Sewage. Here's how you can organise citizen science days to identify where the outlets of the sewage is going in. 2, here's how you can bring an action against the water companies for illegal sewage discharges, both as private actions, but also as public nuisance actions. 3, if the combined sewer overflow and the sewage discharges is technically legal in the current system, here's some ideas here's the headquarters addresses of all the main water companies and their shareholders. And here's the ideas for peaceful actions you can do to try and enforce this right. And we can do that for every single right the river have, abstraction, any ones you wish to do, because there are different ways things can be done under the current framework. And just before I finish, I'd like to just give a practical example of how this is working out on the River Roding. So as you might imagine from the fact that I'm sort of dreaming and imagining different legal systems, I actually would get bored if I spent all my time in the office in London administering the current legal system. So I've lived on a boat for a decade now, and 5 years ago, I found a river in East London that was very unloved. The third biggest river in London after the Thames and the Lee, but no one was in charge of it. No one cared. It was full of rubbish, full of sewage. And I moved there to set up a community to restore it. So we now have a community of boats there, committed to putting in time and money to the restoration of the river. There's your guardianship there. And we now have a Facebook group, I think over 2,000 people now, Friends of the River Roding. And even that, just by itself, has fundamentally changed how the river is seen, because local people now know that river is loved and that river is cared for. And so they start to love and care for it too. You know, you get people posting pictures like, I saw this bird and look at this thing here, and I went for this walk along the Roding, it's beautiful. Even that has shifted fundamentally how the river is seen. But of course we go further than that. Recently we organised a litter pick day to take rubbish out of the river. And whilst on there, we found a sewage discharge, huge, tens of thousands of litres a day going straight into the river. Probably been happening for about a year because nobody's checking. And so even acting in the current legal framework, I then got told Thames Water about it. They came and fixed it. It happened again a week later. And we got local politicians and people involved to try and say this is not acceptable. And then wrote a letter to Thames Water threatening private injunction proceedings on the basis of their infringement of the property rights of the River Roading Trust, which is the moorings we operate. So again, using whatever legal mechanisms we can under the current law to protect the river and uphold its rights. And whereas normally, even if they'd fixed the leak, it would just, get thrown into a bottom of a pile, the EA wouldn't care. We had a meeting with the sustainability director of Thames Water, and they've now bumped up the necessary infrastructure work to stop this happening again. And I said in that meeting, I will always act peacefully, but be under no illusion. I love this river. We love this river, and we will do whatever we can to peacefully protect it. Your days of putting sewage in it without any consequences are over, and you must believe that. And even that, within the current system, has a power. And I hope that through the power of guardianship and these declarations, and acting peacefully and purposely to uphold those declarations, it will unleash a real power to protect and restore our rivers. Just over time, but I hope that was interesting for you. And please do shoot any questions over, even controversial ones. Throw some foxes into the hen house, because I find that difficult questions sharpen my own thoughts on things. And this is still a journey for me as well. I'm still figuring out what all this means and how it can be implemented. And every single talk I've done, I've learned something and gained something from it. So please do ask any questions you have, no matter how difficult they are.
We've already had quite a lot of questions, Paul.
Do you want to shuffle and do you want to sort of, do you want to be the provider of questions, Tony?
Yeah, I'll do that. The first question, it was a kind of comment, but there's a question associated with it. And it comes from Marley, who put into the chat, I am the river and the river is me. And I think, I think that's a sentiment that, I have that feeling too, that, we're water. 86% of us is water. That sense that the river is somehow separate from me when it's part of my life and gives me life. How do you what kind of legal response can there be to this sense of a lack of separation of the entity of a river from people?
I don't know if that quote was chosen deliberately, but actually I was actually going to use this in my talk because it's in it's to do with the Wanganui River, actually. So Wanganui iwi, or tribes, regard the river as their ancestor, and the belief that the people are inseparable from the river underpins the responsibility of the tribes of Wanganui in relation to the care, protection, management and use of the Wanganui River. It is this belief that has given rise to the Wanganui proverb, I won't read it in the Maori, but it translates as, I am the river and the river is me. I increasingly get that sense on the roading. And actually it was a talk just over a year ago. I gave my first ever talk about rights of nature, and I suddenly just blurted out in questions, we love this river and we will do what we can to protect her. I've never actually said it like that before. And I don't know if it was, other lawyers may find that insufferably spiritual or hippie, but to me, it's just a truism.
Yeah, I think it's just ordinary. I think we love our river too.
And love is a very powerful force.
Then
and if directed in the right way, can have a huge legal and political impact, I believe.
Somebody was asking about about animal rights and where animal rights, how animal rights help in developing a sense of the rights of nature.
Yeah, to be honest, I actually tend to, although wildlife I include in the rights of nature, animal rights in terms of particularly domestic pets, I tend to leave aside as an area because it feels very different, because there the arguments are often based more around the sentience of the animals and their ability to feel or not feel pain and that kind of thing. What I would say is that, again, animal rights are just another example of that journey we've been walking. And, they are a lesser step than from humans to trees, but they are still, a step. And it's the same journey from only very select numbers of people having legal rights and personhood in a few 100,000 years ago, to not only all people having it, but then who do we go to sort of beyond that? It's from the book, The Rights of Nature, A History of Environmental Ethics. It's got the evolution of ethics there. I don't know if you can see that. Does that make sense? So you can see the gradual, and we're just on the edge of animals, but there's a lot more of the different parts of law and ethics to come.
Well, somebody says, does the air have rights? Which goes way beyond, because I've been saying in my own work that the us includes animals, trees, rocks, and air.
I think as well, at this point, it's also worth saying that this idea of rights may well, at some point in the future, not be the correct way to conceptualize this. It's slotting in quite esoteric concepts into the current legal framework, but actually it in itself has the idea of separation. So, you know, we say a river, but what do we mean by a river? It's tributaries, like each drop. How do we delineate that? And how do we do that with the air, which is constantly in a constant process of with me, you know, the air is going in and out all the time, you know, and at some point in the future, we may well come to a situation where we don't need to rely on this separation rights-based framework. But in the current emergency we find ourselves in, it's a really useful way to conceptualize something important, and without which I believe we're headed for deep trouble.
So there's a practical issue about abstraction. So if a river, I mean, our river is over abstracted. If we defend its rights not to be over abstracted, in fact, to have its aquifers restored, is that going to be mediated against the claims of the water companies to have have been given legal rights to abstract huge amounts of water, which in fact enough to destroy the river?
Well, this is exactly the point, isn't it? That at the moment there's nothing put in the counterbalance. All we have is the water company's right, but there's no balancing exercise with anything else. So it's just like the water company always win and nature always loses. And I'm not saying that if we were to have rights of nature, nature would therefore always win when it comes to the balancing of those rights. That's not how it works with humans. Human rights are a delicate balancing exercise. So I have freedom of speech, but that's really very abrogated. It's a very qualified right, and I don't get to have freedom of speech where it impinges upon others' rights. And human rights is a very delicate balancing exercise, and we would have to have the same delicate balancing exercise with nature. But the point is we would at least have nature's voice in the room. So when politicians came to decide something, and when courts come to review those decisions, we then say, okay, well, here's what the water company wants to do. Here's why they said they want to do it. Here's the river's interests. By the way, the river, I think, is it the River Rib or the River Bean I saw a photo of recently? Its source is completely dry. The river is basically dead because we've killed it by over abstraction. We need to rebalance those rights. Oh, by the way, water company, here's how many leaks you have, and here's how we're using lots of this water to irrigate really unsustainable crops, or to water golf courses in the height of summer. Actually, balancing these rights, should the right of someone to water their golf course and keep it artificially green be higher than the right of the river to exist? No, it should not. On the other hand, if we were to say, should we allow the water to drop by 2 centimeters across its length in order to stop a whole town of people from dying of lack of water? Maybe we would say yes to that. But that balancing exercise would at least take place. And at the moment, we're not even getting to that because nature's voice is not even in the room.
Somebody was asking if you could sue a river, say, in a flood. Could you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean,
well,
you can,
not, but it's how the legal system would operate around the idea of a river having personhood.
More important actually than can you sue a river is what happens if you damage a river. Because at the moment, as we all know, the EA doesn't do very much enforcement action. And even when it does, the money often gets siphoned off to central government and doesn't go to the river itself.
Can you just say what EA stands for? Because
oh, sorry, the Environment Agency. Sorry,
I know, but not everybody.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I'm using acronyms. Yeah, so the Environment Agency doesn't do very much, and even if it does, the fine just goes off to central government and doesn't go back to the river. So I think a more interesting question is, actually, if you do damage a river, can guardians take the money for that and hold it on trust and use it for the river? I think that would be a very interesting question.
Yeah. So somebody was asking about the movement to create a law of ecocide. Would you see that movement operating hand in hand, or being entirely compatible with the idea of nature rights?
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that nature rights is not necessarily one thing. It's an ecosystem of legal changes and developments, and they operate all different levels. So the ecocide law is effectively nature rights on the international level. But as important as ecocide is, it is not by itself a silver bullet to all of the problems we face, because there's all those other different levels. And we also need rights of nature at an EU level. And there's actually a number of papers that have been written recently to the European Parliament and the European Commission proposing nature rights, proposing a fundamental charter of nature rights. And we need it on a national level, and we need it on a local level. And all of these different things interact. So yes, ecocide is important, and it should obviously happen, and it would help to ensure nature rights at international level. But all the other levels are important as well. And the crucial thing about what I was advocating for in the talk today is, I think sometimes just concentrating on things like ecocide can feel very disempowering to people. You know, you can sign a petition, you can maybe write to someone, but ultimately you can't actually enact it. What's so amazing about this idea of declaring river rights and acting as a guardian for your river, it's something you can do right away that can have a huge impact. And even actually just being able to just go down to your river and pray there, or just to recognize it and to see it as a thing that's alive and to pledge to protect it, has in itself a power. And it's something that all of us can do in our own lives right now. And I feel that that's actually quite comforting to a lot of people, when we live in an age where we're constantly told that everything's going wrong and there's this huge destruction happening, but actually there's not a lot you can do about it, other than writing or signing petitions. Actually, it's like, no, you can go out now and you can change this thing, and it will have a huge impact.
One of the things that felt really optimistic recently was, and you'll know the case better than myself, where I think it's 6 defendants were in court because they had done damage while trying to protect nature and the environment. And the judge said there is no case, they have no case in law, and the jury found them not guilty. And this seemed to me that there is a move to understand that nature has rights which trump some rights already within the legal system. What did you feel about that case?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And actually, I'm really glad you brought it up, because again, it shows, while sometimes we think of the law as this kind of solid object, it's so malleable, and that power is within all of our hands to change the law. And effectively, what is happening there, with what's called jury nullification, it's probably worth spending about 2 minutes just to explain this, what actually the legal framework behind that is. Again, it actually comes from a kind of religious, spiritual origin. So a group of people were arrested in the 17th century for peacefully preaching, which at the time was unlawful, and the jury refused to convict them, even though it was found that they had broken the law. They just had, because the law said you're not allowed to preach on the street if you're not C of E, Church of England. But the jury refused to convict them. The judge then held the jury in prison And then the case where the lead juror was asking to be released, a case called Bushel's case, the law determined that a jury has an absolute right to find a verdict of not guilty according to its conscience. And it doesn't seem that powerful, but it is the most incredibly powerful thing we have, because for every serious crime, so one that's in the magistrates doesn't work because the magistrates have to try don't have the same power. But in any Crown Court trial, so for any serious case, has to go through a jury, and the juries are made up of all of us. And so if enough people in the country decide that something shouldn't be illegal, the effect of jury nullification means that we can actually enact that without even having to go through Parliament. I often think that why is no one really talking about this or sort of shouting it from the rooftops? Because you don't even need a majority. You only need 3 people in every jury to fail to convict, and those people cannot be convicted. There could be a retrial, but again, it would just go back down again and again. So it doesn't even need a majority. It needs 3 people out of the general populace on every jury to refuse to convict. And effectively what we see in the Shell cases is that the way things are now going with climate change protest, I think the law is going to struggle to protect the property of those causing climate genocide against peaceful protest. As in, Shell's property is at serious risk, and the law will no longer protect it because because effectively
Shell, wasn't it, Paul?
Sorry?
The case we're talking about was Shell.
Yeah, exactly. That was Shell. I mean, any major oil company. I mean, obviously I have to try each case according to it, but I cannot see my conscience convicting any peaceful protester who has damaged the property of someone committing climate genocide or destroying nature. And if enough people turn around and do the same, those laws, in a practical sense, change. Would anyone here convict someone for damaging the property of a water company in a peaceful protest against their illegal conduct in dumping sewage in rivers?
I was going to say, if Sue or Jean or Wendy or notice questions that I can't get round to asking, perhaps you'll pipe up in a moment. There's a question about a perennial question about the need to wrench the need to wrench our CAM away from its corporate guardians who pretend to support it and publish pretty pictures of it while despoiling it behind our back. How do we expose their activities?
I mean, this obviously depends on the situation on each river on the ground, and that's often a very detailed matter. As I say, we're hoping to give a general declaration that people can declare and have a toolkit that can generally be applied, but it really does depend on each river on the ground. For instance, the sewage on the Roding that I spoke about earlier, that happened to be actually not a combined sewer overflow. It was just a blockage, therefore creating an entirely illegal discharge. So that shifted how we deal with it. And obviously each bit of the river and every part of it is different in terms of how you are going to react to that. So it's hard to say in general how you deal with it. But there are practical, legal, and campaigning direct action tools to help enforce almost all of the rights that we would want rivers to have and that exist in the current system.
I mean, this issue of storm sewage overflows is a big one. I mean, certainly there's illegal dumping of sewage, but the Environment Agency claim that they have a department which is called the Permitted Pollution or the Pollution Permit Department. How can defenders of the river act to absolutely reduce even the legally allowed pollution of our rivers by sewage?
Again, there's lots of different ways you can approach this. So going to the Roding, that one was illegal. So what is very interesting actually in a lot of these cases is we need to have this idealism, these declarations of principle, but we also need to be like rigorously practical in how we try and enforce those. And so, for instance, the current law, as it's currently stated, just really prizes property rights. I know there's Mark here from a Stop HS2 campaign here who'll be aware of that. I've spent many hours in the High Court trying to protect HS2 protesters, and the judge is saying, well, what about HS2's property rights? The High Court really love property rights. It's almost a fetish. So we match them and we play them at their own game. So instead of just going and so someone's pouring sewage into the River Cam, instead of just saying, well, we believe the River Cam shouldn't have sewage in it, well, they'd be like, that's very interesting. What's your legal right on that? We find a amenable riparian landowner who has an interest in the river, and we get them to do an action against the water company to say, you are polluting the waters. There's a whole slew of case law from medieval times onwards up to the 19th century of the fact that riparian owners have a right to receive the waters of the river in an unpolluted state. And then you bring the action on that basis. So when I wrote to Thames Water a couple of weeks ago about the sewage on the Roding, I didn't actually go from a public perspective. I said, actually, you're infringing the property rights of the River Roding Trust. We have a lease for this mooring. We couldn't use the mooring because there was poo flowing past us. We couldn't use the water to water our plants or have a fire bath. And we couldn't swim in the river like we like to. You've infringed our property rights. If you don't stop, we will get an injunction. And the High Court will support an injunction in favour of private property rights, for instance. But if that doesn't work, then you have to go to campaigning. And so whilst the sewage overflow was happening, I took a 5-litre bottle of water down to the river and took 5 litres of the flow that was coming out of the sewage overflow. And it's still on my moorings now. It's got a really terrifying shade of green where it's been sort of stewing for a month. And then, you ask a very simple question to Thames Water, to their, was it Water UK or whoever their tedious lobby group is. You have poured tens of thousands of litres a day of raw sewage into my back garden, into my back garden, into my river, and effectively into my home, because I live on the river. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't come and pour this sewage over your front garden, over your reception desk at Thames Water. Why? What's the difference? And I think that's a really simple, powerful question. I haven't actually done it yet because I'm sure it would be a criminal offence. But of course, then the question is, if it's a criminal offence to pour 5 litres over their reception desk, what should be the criminal offence if someone pours 500,000 litres directly into a river? And I'm not sure the police or the EA or Thames Water have a good argument for that, because there is none, is there? They're both, well, one is a much more serious crime than the other, but for some reason, our current system, one crime is given priority.
Mark Cheetham was asking why don't we all buy one share in each of the water companies and then take over the shareholder meetings?
Yeah, great. I mean, I wouldn't say protest outside, but that's an even better idea. Yeah, exactly. Imaginative protest and direct action. Yeah, and obviously always remaining peaceful, because any kind of violence will weaken and abrogate the movement. But there is a huge range of activity that can be done to peacefully draw attention to the illegal and immoral conduct of the water companies. And every water company will be different in terms of where you find your points to go in at. Does a certain water company have a large shareholder with who would be amenable to public pressure? Does the head of the water company live locally? All these kind of things will depend, but that will change for every river in the UK, and that's why a local approach is so needed, which will also feed into a national approach.
Sue, have you come across any other questions?
There's been a couple of questions about conflicting rights. If you have a conflict of rights for the river and then rights to legally abstract water that the companies might have, or a farmer's field's rights against the farmer's rights, is there a kind of priority that would govern those, Paul?
Do you mean in an ideal world or in the current system?
Yeah, both.
Well, as I said earlier, when we eventually come to a system of nature rights, that those will all have to be balanced. And I gave that example about abstraction earlier. In the current system, yes, they are. There is case law on it. and what over-abstracted means. And a lot of it actually was boaters versus millers in the 19th century. It was quite a big area of case law, because some people wanted to use the water of the river to go up, down as quickly as possible, and some people wanted to use it for milling. Obviously, it's quite different now, but that's to be balanced by the court. Actually, I've just seen a question here from Claire Preston about a river or swimming or fishing club. Will that work for legal challenges? And actually, I think that's a really great way to get legal challenges going, because ultimately, if those clubs have property rights in the river, and the sewage company, sorry, the water company is putting sewage in is stopping them using their property rights, then that's a perfectly good legal challenge. The other thing is using existing areas of law in an imaginative way. So, for instance, in personal injury and tort law, you can't knowingly harm somebody else. And there was a whole area of case law a few years ago where people who got stomach bugs whilst on holiday, they managed to sue the hotels. And I think a very interesting area of case law would be people who swum in rivers, and then if we're able to connect the swimming in rivers to, gastroenteritis and stomach bugs, which I'm actually reasonably sure I've gotten swimming in the river before, getting people to sue the water companies on that basis, which have whole different cost protections and regimes for the water companies, and would, if enough claims went in, would start to hammer them. And that's what we're really looking at, is finding as many imaginative ways to try and hit the problem and hit the water companies as much as possible, but always linked to this greater, broader philosophical and spiritual dimension of nature rights. And I think the two linked in together has a real power.
And one question that struck my notice earlier on from Damien Benskin is a sort of question on magnitude. At what point do you think a river with standing and the right to be free from pollution would have a good case to sue for this right to be enforced? Would it be likely saved for cases when there's a particularly egregious offence? Or would it have a case for saying the current level is unacceptable and clean-up must immediately start?
I mean, the current system, of course, huge pollution can occur with very little backup. Very little comeback, In the future, if we're heading towards a system of nature rights, of course, I think the standards would be ever tightening. And actually, we might eventually reach a stage where any pollution at all was not acceptable. I mean, when you think about it from first principles, it's quite odd, isn't it, that our rivers are so disgusting, the authorities have to tell us not to swim in them. And then if we go back and feel like, why can't we even drink from our rivers? Be mad to even consider that question. But actually, if you think about it from first principles, why are our rivers so disgusting that you can't drink from? And could we ever head to a system where, in fact, you could? I believe you might be able to. But we're starting at the moment from just trying to prevent the very worst excesses of pollution, and hopefully over time be able to improve upon that.
We've had an absurd situation in Cambridge where there's a push to make one section of the river into a safe bathing place. This has also happened recently into a river in the north of England.
The Ilkley people, yeah.
Yeah, the Ilkley people. And of course, you cannot make a river pure and safe in one place unless you make it safe and pure all the way upstream from that place.
But I mean, the bathing safety thing is quite interesting, because again, it's not the ideal vehicle to be using for this kind of thing, but it's clearly it's one that's in the current law, and I think a number of people have seen as one vehicle for trying to push this. And I don't think it's necessarily going to solve it by itself. I think it's a very clever way of using the existing mechanism. And what other mechanisms are there, even within the current system, we can use to try and protect and restore our rivers? I think there are many more, and it's not a silver bullet, of course it's not, but I think it's another mechanism to push on to try and achieve these aims of protecting and restoring the river.
I think some of us were worried that the idea of creating a bathing place in the area is to do with encouraging tourism, building up car parks, actually in effect increasing the level of pollution rather than reducing it, but using the river as a natural asset in order to gain income for the city.
Well, I mean, you've hit upon a very, I don't know if 8:15 is the time to bring this into discussion, but a very interesting one. Of one right that I would like to put into some rights of rivers is a right to a relationship with human beings. Possibly the most controversial one that opens a whole can of worms. But I believe on a spiritual level that humans both deserve a relationship with nature, and also that this earth and nature kind of wants a relationship with us, if that makes sense. Humans are stewards here, or should be stewards here. And I'm not one of the people that says that in order to protect nature, we need to entirely always exclude humans from it. But it's a very difficult one. I know that it arouses quite strong passions on either side, because some people just want to not have humans in nature at all. I believe at this stage, actually, that humans in nature really does help protect it, because of the over-concentration on human rights in our legal system. You can use those human rights to try and protect nature by the back door almost. So the river itself doesn't have a right to not be polluted or covered in sewage, but I have a right to swim in it, and therefore it mustn't be covered in sewage. The end result is the same, but we use human rights as a kind of vehicle for that. It's, again, a very good tactic in the current system. But more than that, actually, a lot of the times human presence is needed in order to protect and restore the river. For instance, the second time there was a sewage overspill on the Roding, I only noticed it because I was doing a pilgrimage from the source of the river to the sea that weekend. I happened to just literally walk past and see there was raw shit going into the river again. Had I not been doing that pilgrimage, had I not been connected with nature, that would never have been discovered, probably for days or weeks. Had I not been trespassing on someone else's land beside the river, it wouldn't have been discovered either. That's a whole other thing, you know. As the HS2 protesters have found, trespass law is often used to exclude those who want to protect nature from seeing the crimes and destruction that's happening. I think that may be something that ramps up over the coming years. I fundamentally believe that obviously we don't want it done to excess, and we don't want negative interactions between humans and nature, or too much of it. But I think there is a really important role to be played by humans and their relationships to rivers in this.
Yeah, Alan has been asking about how we draw together the rowing clubs, the sailing clubs, the swimmers, the canoeists. I mean, there's a mass of people who have an interest in the river, who then could report on illnesses that they've had from being in the river, but also what they've observed in the river, and maybe group together to monitor the river. But this bringing groups together, like Friends of the Camp, but also with all these other groups, then that has some possibility, particularly if we really take on board the suggestion that we have rights to have a non-polluted river. Wendy, would you like?
I just wanted to ask, it was a question that the landscape architect, Kim Wilkie, talked about at a previous talk, when he talked about when they set up the Thames landscape strategy in London. So it's like setting up a kind of the river as a kind of planning policy for a river having its own planning policy. Is that another way in which one might achieve a form of protection? A river having rights in sense of it's seen as a separate body, you know.
Again, I think that's a really useful tool in the current system. And why not? And actually, it feels a bit like what happened in New Zealand, doesn't it? Sort of making it into a separate body. Although, you know, it can go either way. Like the Lee Valley Regional Park Authority's own planning authority, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
So, you know, so it depends who is doing that and why.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a problem that's come up. That is an issue that's been raised on the Ilkley the bathing issue, that the fact that the community groups who raised the issue of safe bathing appear to have been excluded from decisions.
Yeah.
With the setting up of a river partnership.
Yeah, and this will happen as anyone who begins doing sort of radical nature rights work. Politicians will realise something needs to be done, but they'll try and exclude the most radical elements. So they'll sort of take it and they'll dress it up, and then they'll kind of throw it back in a half-assed way. You know, the EA doing measurements above the sewer overflow in Ilkley, and excluding the main group who've been arguing for it. But then, of course, people, you know, the guardians don't go away, do they? They keep on plugging, and they keep on doing whatever they peacefully can to protect their river, which is what's happening in Ilkley. And I think as well, you know, the Ilkley example is very interesting as well, because it's just a bunch of people acting within the current legal frameworks, but by their passion and their activism and their care for the river, they are changing things, and they're already on everyone's lips as a group who are doing things. And you're already starting to hear the rivers where people are starting to pick these things up, you know, whether it's the Roding or the Cam or the River Wharf up in Ilkley, where river guardians and river groups are being set up, it's already changing that context of how the river is seen.
Is there anyone else who has a burning question? Perhaps you'll unmute yourself and ask it.
I've
Okay.
already put this question on the chat, but there was an interesting paper in New Scientist of the 1st of May talking about the possible sentience of trees. A lady in Canada has been doing a lot of research, and she thinks that it's possible that trees are sentient. Now, if that becomes proven and accepted, what effect does that have on the legal rights of trees?
On the legal rights, it has zero effect whatsoever. But on the campaign to bring rivers' rights or trees' rights, that has a big effect, because it's a thing you can point to as saying, okay, well, these trees are sentient, therefore they should have rights. But
right.
With all these things, just doing that in a vacuum, science proving that even if it did prove that the trees are sentient, doesn't change the legal framework. You know, humans were sentient, but we denied many of them rights for thousands of years because rights are a political question. You know, companies aren't sentient. Companies don't exist, and yet we gave them rights. You know, like we need to maybe disentangle this idea of legal rights and personhoods from sentience, and recognize that it's a political question, but that equally that means it has a political solution and a campaigning solution, and being able to draw attention to sentience could be a key part of that.
We're sort of heading towards an end of the evening. What I wanted to say is that on the 21st of June, we are going to declare the rights of the River Cam at 6 p.m. on Jesus Green, and already there are groups of artists and potentially musicians and others who will come there to declare the rights of the River Cam and to have a picnic and to celebrate the river. And there'll be an open microphone where people will tell, not in too great length, but tell a story of their relationship to the river. And so I hope everybody will come to that, and that this movement between this evening and building up to the declaration of the rights of the river will create in us all a sense of guardianship of our river, and a determination not to let those non-existent companies have the last word in what happens to the rivers, which, as Marley said, our river is us, and we are the river. And I think that's a deeply held belief, which I hope will be more widely shared and give us the strength to defend it.
Yeah, and I'd just like to end on that note as well, to say to people, you know, the most powerful thing you can start with is to go down to your river and spend some time with her and build a connection with her, and things will flow from that, I believe. Go and connect with the river and And if there is a friends group, join it and try and get them to adopt these declarations and to then try and enforce them. And if there isn't a friends group for a local river, set one up and get involved with the people in the local area who also want to protect this, and then start drafting declaring rights and working out ways that you can practically try and protect and restore the river using those rights. But the first step is really connection and love.
Yeah, Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Some of us are meeting at Clay Farm Library, and then we're going to walk to the source of Hobson's stream, Hobson's Brook, which was originally the source of all the drinking water of Cambridge, and is about to be surrounded by millions of tons of concrete in a busway, which we don't need. Thank you, Paul. It's been brilliant this evening. If you and friends can come and join us for our evening picnic on Midsummer Day.
I'm normally far more hedonistic on the solstice, but I am really keen because I think this is one of the first declarations of rights of river. So I would really like to join you and also be up for helping you draft those rights if you want to help with that. So happy to help out with that and to join you.
Brilliant, thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. It's been wonderful that so many people came. There's still a lot of people here, and we look forward to seeing you at the Declaration of the Rights of the River and in future events we organise through Friends of the River Cam. Thank you.